Well, good morning. So my role in the next few minutes is to help you think about the emerging future. The industry has done a phenomenal job in recovering as quickly as it has from the pandemic. And it's very natural to be focusing on the here and now. How do we drive growth? How do we drive profitability? But one of the interesting things we're seeing is that there are a number of leaders in the industry and in other sectors that we work with as researchers, as consultants, as educators, where they're saying, in the past, we might not wanted to have looked at storm clouds on the horizon or disruptions or shifts. But actually they're saying, now we need to give ourselves permission to look at those things because we've just been through a massive shock. And we want to make sure that we're thinking about them in a different way. We're looking at how might they change our world, how might they create new opportunities for us, how might we need to change our business models, how might we look at different markets we can reach, and what capabilities do we need to take the right kind of action. And when we look at the future, we all know it's very uncertain. And the pandemic taught us that many of the things that happened were unthinkable. If I told you at the beginning of 2020 that we were going to shut down the entire industry, it would have been unthinkable. If I then told you that we would have closed it down for up to 2 years in part of the world, that would have been unbelievable. But the thing we learned was that it was unmanageable. And what we realized also was that we didn't have the tools to deal with it. We couldn't generate revenue when things were shut down using our current tools and ways of thinking. And what that taught us is we need to unlearn some of the past views and assumptions and some of our strategies in order to navigate what's next. And so we also know that there isn't a kind of certain view of the future. I've been hearing people tell me the future is going to be like this, or it's going to be exactly like that, or WTTC tell us that by 2030, the industry growth rate will be double that of global GDP. And those are great, they're predictions, they're forecasts, but we can't be sure. And so we're seeing more and more leaders saying, well, how do we make sure we're prepared for a range of possibilities? And when we start to look at those things on the horizon, we see that they create both opportunity and risk. And there are three big ones that everyone is talking about now. The first is climate change, where we saw the Secretary General of the UN get on stage at COP27 last week and say to world leaders, we're on the highway to hell around climate change, and you have your foot on the accelerator pedal. There is no one in the kind of world looking at climate change in any depth who believes now that the current actions we're taking are going to get us anywhere close to net zero. So we know there are some shocks coming. The question is, how do we deal with that, or what can we do? And we're seeing two responses. One group saying, we need to go hell for leather, we need to go all out to try and get to net zero. But another group is saying, look, well, if we're not going to get there, we should start planning now for what happens if we don't. How will that impact our business? What does that mean in terms of our strategies? What does that mean in terms of how we adapt to it? The second big one is economic volatility. All around the world, people are struggling with inflation, they're struggling with investment decline in certain sectors, and they're struggling with the view that we might be going into a recession. In the UK, the Bank of England has told us that we could have a 2-year recession. So more and more people are then saying, well, okay, if we have that, what does that mean in terms of how we adapt our strategy? What new pricing and revenue models do we need? And then the third one is a fundamental long-term shift, which is automation. And we know that if we have a recession, that's likely to accelerate the adoption of AI and other automation technologies. Pretty much every company we work with in professional services, in financial services, in manufacturing, have plans to reduce headcount quite significantly. We heard yesterday that Amazon itself is planning to reduce headcount by 10,000 people. Now that will have an impact on our sector, because it might mean that for a period there'll be less people traveling until they find new jobs, but also there might be less managers and less people going on business travel. So we can either have hope as a strategy that it will all be all right, or we can think about what might we do with that. And so the first thing we need to think about is, well, how might this change our business models and revenue streams? What are the things we can be doing to generate new revenues? Now, there's a lot of noise about crypto out there, but leaving aside the noise, one of the things we need to recognize is that there are 350 million people plus who own crypto today. Last year, over 25% of American travelers said they would like to pay for travel with crypto. We now see a lot of people earning their money in crypto. They're working in metaverses or they're working in businesses where they're choosing to be paid in crypto. And now you've got players like MasterCard, Visa, Stripe, PayPal, allowing a customer to pay, your customers to pay in crypto and instantly giving you your base currency. So you wouldn't say no to getting paid in euros, you wouldn't say no to getting paid in Indian rupees, you'd just convert that to the US dollar or whatever your currency is. Those players like MasterCard and the other payment players are now making it possible for you to accept. And the question is, why wouldn't you? So we're seeing airlines, particularly in Europe, like LOT and Air Baltic and Singapore Airlines, starting to accept crypto. The Dolder Grand in Switzerland was the first hotel to accept crypto. Resorts World in Las Vegas, more and more people. Expedia uses the Travala processing platform to offer over 700,000 products which you can pay for in crypto. Travala itself supports something like 3 million. So there is a shift going on, and there's just a question about, well, why wouldn't we tap into that additional revenue stream? Because there are people who want to pay for it. The second is starting to think about new ways of charging. So the industry is starting to adopt buy now, pay later. There are platform providers doing that for us. Well, if we start to look at the future, one of the things we'll see is people going back again to old products or old ways of paying, and one was the savings club. Many of us have got used to those schemes now where you can go into a Starbucks, you pay for your coffee, you pay $3.50, and you can opt to have that rounded up to $4, and the 50 cents going into a savings scheme or whatever you want. Well, pretty soon we'll have platform providers offering us the ability to say to a customer, if you top up and put into a savings scheme associated with us, we'll sell you a hotel room or an attraction visit or a flight and an agreed price, but you might start saving for that a year in advance. We've locked them in early. We've given them a discount early because otherwise we might have to discount inventory at the end by far more. But the key is we've locked them in. And they might have paid for 10 to 20% of their trip before they get to the travel date, and then they pay for the rest at the time. But we've locked them in early, we can build a relationship early. We're also seeing other ideas starting to emerge. What we're beginning to understand is that pretty much everything we own has a value. Pretty much everything has some sort of monetary value. So your baseball cards, my programs from Chelsea, all have a value, I can sell them. My parking space outside my house, people will pay for that now. My loyalty cards, they're effectively worth money. And the trees in my garden. We talked about carbon offsets earlier and what Phocuswright are doing. Well, one of the things that people are doing now is putting sensors on trees to say, let's monitor the amount of carbon being absorbed by this tree so we can prove that what you're paying for is actually happening. Let's put that information onto a blockchain so it can't be edited in any way and you can see it. But also let's give you an NFT, a non-fungible token, basically a digital certificate of ownership that means we can't sell those trees 3 times over. But the really interesting thing that opens up is the possibility for you to take your trees in your garden and put them into one of these schemes and start earning money. So we're moving into a world where I have all sorts of assets. Today, if I walked into this hotel and put my collection of Chelsea programs on the table and said, can I have a room for 3 nights? The check-in staff are going to look at me and maybe call security. But now what we're going to see is people creating those platforms again, where I can put those assets up and use them to pay for services. When I want to make a purchase, they'll basically sell it in the market for me, we'll exchange the NFT that represents those assets, we'll then exchange the physical goods. All of that will be done automatically, and all of that will be then transferred to whoever I want the money to go to. So when we start to think about emerging models of payment, we can start to expand the different ways in which we might get money. And if we're talking about a world in which people's incomes might be further pressurized by recession, by automation and the loss of jobs, then we need to think more broadly about, well, how might we help people pay for what they're going to do? We also need to think about, well, how else might we reach people, or who else might we reach? In the pandemic, most of us couldn't make any money. We couldn't sell our rooms, we couldn't sell our flights. But throughout the year, what we know is that 60% to 70% of the entire planet never travel. They never visit a hotel. And this is raising the question of how might we reach those audiences? What can we do with our assets to reach people who might never travel, or people who can't travel because of climate restrictions or whatever, or temporary economic challenges? And you're starting to see some people saying, well, let's think about how we can use our assets differently. We're working with an airline and the person we're working with has been challenged with the idea that what if we had another pandemic or other activity that shut us down completely, so we weren't selling a single ticket? How would we still generate 10% of our revenues through other activities, through leveraging our brand? And we're seeing examples of that happening. So Etihad recently sold 2003 NFTs. Again, you don't have to know the details, but these are basically digital secure representations. They're digital collectibles. They sold them for $349 each. It gave you silver tier status and access to a range of benefits. But the really interesting thing here was that over 50% of the people who bought the NFTs had never been on a plane before. They're reaching new audiences. They're saying, how do we leverage our assets to get to them? You're also seeing people say, well, is there an opportunity here in the metaverses? Now, forget the new ones like Facebook Horizons and Decentraland. Focus on the ones that are already there. If you look at the existing metaverses, the average, the majority of users are aged under 18. There's a multi-billion-dollar economy, and people are spending a lot of time there, and brands are beginning to recognize that they can create relationships with people and then monetize those relationships. Ariana Grande did a concert in Fortnite last year. 78 million people attended, and they raised $20 million in revenues from selling digital assets. We're now seeing airlines selling tickets in the metaverse, creating relationships, airports like Incheon allowing customers to learn how to check in at their airport. We're seeing a lot of airports who make more money out of retail than they do out of the landing fees, saying, well, basically we're a shopping mall. So what if we were to take that concept into a metaverse, take all those retail brands that we have a relationship with, and create our own presence there in a world where Gucci, Adidas, and all sorts of other people are already there? So how would we think differently about creating new opportunities? And I talked earlier about being able to play with multiple assets. Well, we're starting to see the first versions of those multi-asset accounts. This is a company called Zelf, who've set up a bank in the metaverse where you can put cash in, you can put your NFTs, your cryptos, and the rewards you've earned playing games. When you want to make a purchase of something in the real world, like a flight, you basically convert those into cash, you put it on a Visa card, and you go and pay. So we're opening up some very interesting possibilities. So what are some of the things you can do to start developing that mindset shift, to developing disruptor leaders? Well, first, it's absolutely fine to say we're going to stay in our lane, we're very happy, we're hitting record numbers, we're just going to carry on doing what we're doing, and we'll be fine. But some are saying, no, actually, let's start to use our people to become a natural radar for us, to talk to all the people around them, to look at what new business models they're seeing, what new ways of people being paid, and to start just generating new ideas for us. The second is to make sure we are considering some of those radical scenarios because we've just been through one. And the third, which is a really interesting one, which is to say, let's do a big thought experiment. What if we were going to start again? We're not going to break anything by doing that thinking, but what if we allowed ourselves to just go through an exercise of saying, what if today was day one? How would we do what we were doing in the future if we were starting again? So this has been a very quick canter through. I think one of the most important things in this is being open to ideas, looking at our body language, Everyone says they're open to ideas, but what's your organization really like when someone comes forward with a radical idea? And what are we like when someone from outside brings us a radical idea? Does our body language, does our behavior reflect the message we're putting out there? So to close, I think my view is that we all know how to dance to certain things. There's a market downturn, a competitor offering, a change in customer behavior. We know the dance steps to use in all those cases. But right now, the music is changing very fast. There are a lot of new dance routines, and we have to get out there and start experimenting, learning. And you can't learn how to dance by writing a business plan. You have to get on the dance floor, you have to look ugly for a while, you have to tread on other people's feet, you have to kick yourself, and you may never get brilliant at any dance routine, and the music might keep changing. But that's our challenge now, is developing organizations that are really good dancers, or really willing to keep learning how to dance. So that's been a very quick canter through some ideas about how we go after new opportunities in a fast-changing world. I'll be at the back of the hall after the break, or during the break, where we've got a few copies of our book to give away if anyone's interested. But thank you very much for your time.
Since humans first began exploring the world, the way we travel has evolved. Those who resisted change were left behind. Those who adapted pioneered paths to the future and became titans of their industries. The strongest of those titans continue blazing new trails. In an industry that never slows down, demand a travel protection partner that's both legendary and visionary. Discover the Allianz Advantage.